sometimes people just need a job or a vocation or some little thing or a hope or a hamburger. And man, they gave them the hope and they went down and got a job and they turned it around. I just think of those people not being deeply integrated into poverty.
Right.
They're able to step out.
Right. We see it all around us. Poverty. It's in our nation. It's around the globe. And we wonder, how do we fix it? Do we just throw money at it? Or are there other ways to address this issue that affects so many people? I've invited an expert in this area back on the show, a missionary to Guatemala, George Roller, who faces this issue day in, day out. And he's illuminated, maybe not the end game, but definitely the beginning of a conversation. I can't wait for you to listen in. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership. George Roller, so good to have you back, man.
It's good to be here, Nate. Good to be here.
All the way from Guatemala.
Yes.
Yeah, man. So we left off, and such a great conversation. If you're a listener, you haven't heard the first episode with George, myself, and with Joe, definitely go back, listen to that episode. Such great content on George's decision to go into full-time ministry, his call to help those who need help where they need it most. And so just off camera, we were talking a little bit about poverty and how poverty is not a new idea. It's not like, oh my goodness, there's poverty, right? It's been around. We haven't figured out ways to really move out of poverty. It still exists. It's still everywhere. And having a conversation around it and perhaps some ways to have progress in this area, I think is timely. In fact, just last month for us, my son and I were doing a what are called 30 Days of Love. And so I was moved to just spend time during the Christmas season in charity, how to really be intentional about being charitable. And so our very first day, we went to downtown St. Louis and we got 10 bags of hot McDonald's and just drove around the city and looked for people who were homeless. And at first my son's like, is this safe, Dad? I said, well, if it's safe or not, it's gonna be okay. And, we prayed and he's like, what if we don't find anybody? I said, we're going to find people. And he said, what are they going to say? I was like, well, we'll just roll the window down. We'll just say, hey, we've got hot food on a cold day. Would you like a bag of McDonald's? And George, when we started to see people, that's exactly what we did. And to see the look on individuals' faces, like, wow, you're bringing me a hot meal. Thank you. I mean, that human connection for someone that's in a poverty situation, it's moving, it's a connection, it's life-changing. And, it affected my son in such a great way. It's like, Dad, how can we continue to make a difference in people's lives? What can we do? We were in DC a few weeks ago for a conference. I brought him with me and we were walking down the streets of DC and we saw a bag, it looked like a tarp. A rolled tarp and it was rainy. It's like, what's a tarp doing on the street? Well, it was a person in the tarp trying to stay dry. And he saw that. He's like, wow, Dad, from a middle class. Now I grew up poverty, not abject poverty, but we were poor, didn't have much. There were a lot of days where we didn't have enough to eat, my mom and myself, and people who are listening to the podcast would know this because I've talked about it before. There's that kind of poverty to where you can still make it, but then there's a different kind of poverty, and I'm sure you're going to talk about that. That's abject poverty that has no real way out in and of yourself.
Correct. Well, Nate, you're exactly on target. I look at poverty kind of in two ways. You have the type of poverty where you have a situation, maybe you lost your job. And I've studied a lot of books that talks about moving between lower class, middle class, upper class, middle class, a bankruptcy. Some people that are marginal middle class, maybe they lose a job and their car breaks in the same week. And then, then they have a court hearing and next thing you know, they lose their job. And next thing you know, they're literally homeless that quick. And then you have what I call generational poverty or cyclical poverty. And I look at that like, it's a deep ravine. And they've got, in the case of where we work in Guatemala, you've got 500 years of generational poverty. And so there's so many things that can change, just like your efforts of bringing hope to people can sometimes make a difference. You read and you hear about a lot of specials where someone goes and does one or two things and someone pops up and they go like, I can make a difference. I can take this vocational class and I can get ahead, or, and then they make that change, and then they step out. And then when you have generational poverty, you're working on so many different levels, on the psychiatric level, the health level, the expectation level, executive skills. There's so many things involved to help someone lift out of generational poverty. We call it crabs in a bucket. Mm-hmm. Somebody is wanting to get out of the bucket. Yeah. And it's very difficult.
Because you mentioned it's like a tract when we were off camera, right? You've got those who perhaps grow up in wealth, and they understand. Now, of course, you can grow up in wealth and end up being poor by poor decisions. But generally speaking, you have this track that you're on, right? Education, investments, friends. So on and so forth. Right. Yeah. Your peer group, all of that, right? Your community, your entire social environment is a track. And then there's another track. And there's the poverty track, right? Where you have generation after generation after generation on this track.
Exactly. And you get it. There's a great book called The Framework of Poverty, and it talks about the movement between the three classes. And it's really enlightening, when they talk about what happens and moving between that. But I mean, one example I have, we took in 4 kids 4 years ago. And 2 of the kids in this process the older ones have kind of made their own way, left the house, stolen from us, done different things as their poverty track kind of took place, and then they started tracking with it. The 2 younger ones we've been able to not control anymore, but educate and kind of form, I guess would be a better word. But one example I have is just so heartbreaking. We have decided that we wanted the kids to travel with us. So we wanted to get them passports. Well, getting them passports for an indigenous kid that doesn't have a mom and dad, that's like heaven and earth, moving heaven and earth in Guatemala. So I won't even tell you about the amount of money, but 10 visits to the passport office, thousands of dollars to get everything approved. We finally get the passport office to approve their passport. They literally are taking to the lawyer to the line to get their photos and to print their passports. And the lady doing it looks at them and says, "You're indigenous kids. You guys are too young. You shouldn't have passports." Starts tearing their paperwork up.
What?
And the lawyer had to come out of the office, patch everything up, and kind of give her a stern warning to give that the paperwork's in order. They should get their passports. And she's like, "I can't get a passport. Why should they get a passport?" And that's generational poverty. That's crabs in a bucket. If you start to climb out, they're going to eat you and pull you back down.
That's almost unbelievable. I mean, because in the U.S. context, right, you're terminated from your employment for that, right?
Well, the hardest thing for me to understand in dealing with this, Nate, is that like in America, and I'm not saying America, it's in the Western world, a parent or an uncle or an aunt or a grandparent, they will do anything to see the next generation, grow. I mean, you've heard stories of fathers that worked 2 jobs and all the money went to put junior into college, or a mom that saved money so her daughter could have a chance at life. But in a third world country, I think the needs and the lack of nurturing is there, that it's the exact opposite. They actually don't want their kids to succeed in many cases, not 100%. But when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about the majority of people don't want to see them,
to succeed. Yeah. And I would imagine someone listening who grew up in an environment here in the United States, which had a poverty mindset, may have experienced some similar behaviors in their own peer group, parents or grandparents or nieces, nephews, uncles, someone in the group who had tried to hold them down and trying to keep them from excelling for a number of reasons that maybe are similar to those third world
Exactly. It can be. I think it's just the nature of poverty. It doesn't have anything to do with the continent you're on, but it does have to do with maybe the people you're around.
Yeah.
And it is huge. And when you think about even the physiological part of it, I've been studying a lot about trauma, and I'm not a medical professional, but I've learned enough to understand that, like if you look at the desktop of your computer and you see a folder and you want to open it up, you double click on that folder. In about a quarter of a second, that folder pops up, and then you have maybe 10 items there. You double click on the one you want. In a second and a half or so, it clicks right up. It's a big file. Maybe it's 2 seconds or something. That, call that retrieval of information. Well, when you're in trauma and you've been traumatized and you don't have nutrition, the kids and the adults cannot retrieve information. So when you say, hey, what's 8 times 8? Or what's the capital of Missouri? Or what's, they actually have that information, but because of the trauma and because of the lack of nutrition, they don't have a pathway to that information.
Right.
And so because they don't have that pathway or that ability to retrieve that information, then their academic future really gets limited. And sometimes they get, labeled like, special needs or something like that, when it's simply a counseling or a nutritional.
Yeah.
Or the young man that we were so privileged to take into our home, we've spent 3 years teaching him his multiplication tables. He's not special needs. There's a lack of trauma and nutrition has taken place. And it's just now after the 4th year that I guess the nutrition or the expectations is there, that he's now getting it. And how many kids have that opportunity to be able to grow?
Yeah. A couple different word pictures come up. Like one is that if it's a train on a track and the individual is a train, there's the train has the fuel, but the track is broken. The pathway is not, you're not able to get there. And so you have to rebuild that pathway. You have to rebuild those tracks to get to the intended destination. In another word picture, maybe a little different, if you've ever seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, he's stranded on an island. And so he wants to get off, but these waves are crashing in his little makeshift raft that he's created, and he just can't seem to get past these waves. And I wonder, I wonder if that's a bit of the way that poverty works, because I think about it in my own life, growing up poor and transitioning over the years into, comfort, upper middle class, I guess you'd say. And so it's like, okay, well, what were those steps? I grew up in a broken home, and, we've talked about this before, trauma and all that. And so you try to deconstruct your own life to figure out, okay, what were the steps that you were able to cross that
components,
wave?
The components of success.
Right. To get to that outcome. And I think you're hitting on a number of the different pieces, right? The social environment, the peer group, the small victories, creating opportunities and building your own, reconstructing your own, if you will, that track, so that your train can actually get to your desired destination. I mean, there's a lot of pieces involved there.
There are a lot of pieces. I think 2 of the top pieces is hope and expectations. And as I've worked with the kids in our home, if I write a book, it's going to be When Poverty Walked Through My Front Door. And when you're dealing with these kids on a daily basis, you love them. They're basically your kids, but you can't legally adopt them. And you see it and you start talking about, what do you want to be when you grow up? I raised 2 biological kids here in the States. They're both, praise the Lord, they're both successful and doing well. They both got a college education and they're upward bound. I set expectations the whole way. Not unrealistic expectations, but expectations. You will go to college. When you start this company, you'll double your salary in the first 5 years. These are the expectations I put on them, or I brought them to. And that's kind of the way I'm wired.
Yeah.
And so as I talk to the kids we have now, there's no expectations. There's no hope. You talk to them, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a coach. The youngest one wants to be Captain America. Okay, you want to be Captain America, maybe you should start lifting weights. And there's no expectation that any of these outcomes could actually happen, because there's an air of desperateness or lack of hope. So instilling hope and expectations, believable,
right,
is huge.
Yeah, man, you hit it. Someone listening right now is getting it. Like they're getting either why they're able to move forward through hope and expectations. I love how you identified that so clearly. Or on the other side, someone's listening saying, yeah, I have no hope and my expectations, I can't even define what expectations are, let alone anyone else for me. And I think those are such critical pieces for those of us who are in leadership, who have opportunity to identify at minimum those two pieces. And I think about my own life, same thing, right? My mom was full of hope, right? Very optimistic about a lot. Like you can do anything you want, even though we don't have much, you can. But then super high expectations. I came home with straight A's in 8th grade, and she was like, okay, I expected you to get straight A's. And I was like, oh man, what I gotta raise the ante here. You know, what do I gotta do next? Maybe I gotta win student council president, right? But not that she disparaged that. It's that her expectation was that I expect you to reach the highest possible level because you have the aptitude to do it. And like you said, it's got to be realistic and believable, right?
The key is it's got to be believable, or the person that is the expectations are on, whether they're self-imposed or socially or by parents, that you got to believe that you can achieve that. And that's what I'm working through with our kids right now. They don't believe they can be a professional,
right? Because
3 years ago they were barefoot running down a trail and not able to attend school. So the track has been so steep to get them to where they are today, just graduating the grade. As an example, the oldest daughter I have with us right now is entering 7th grade. She's actually, I think, technically 3 grades behind if you were to look at the age cycle, but she's 14, almost 15. She's going into 7th grade. This is the highest academic standing anybody in their greater family has ever achieved. 7th grade.
That's huge.
Parents, 8 brothers and sisters, uncles, aunts, grandparents. This is the highest level of education that anybody has achieved.
I think it's important too that you bring that up, George, because we have to set expectations based on the context that they're experiencing.
That's good. I like that.
Because if we try to set it based on someone else's context, then we're likely to be disappointed, because this is not your social environment. What is your social environment? What are the parameters? And then how can we create wins within those parameters and exclude all other factors that are irrelevant really in this journey, right? i.e., well, we need to get you to Harvard.
Right.
That's a little irrelevant, right? Besides that, there's really the ROI on that is insignificant, even if we made that attempt. So let's look at what our highest possible ROI is, 7th grade. So then let's celebrate that. Because I believe that small victories build courage. And actually, that's a huge victory.
Right.
Right? I mean, that would be equivalent of maybe the Nobel Peace Prize for someone that's grown up in an environment that stewards and shepherds that type of opportunity.
Yeah. I think you make an excellent point with the concept of the wins. I look at it like a staircase. And by that, I think it creates data points that creates a trajectory. So if you are taking 3 steps, I did 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, now you have a staircase. What's your trajectory? 12th grade.
Right.
You've achieved this memorization. You've achieved this skill. What's your trajectory? Success in life. Because this is all what I've already learned and I'm only 14.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how do you create those steps in your own journey as in ministry in Guatemala with these groups? I mean, you know where they are, where their starting place is, what your desired outcome is. What are some of the roadblocks that you face?
The biggest roadblock is what we've just talked about is hope, or the opposite of hope, not having hope, or not having expectations, or not believing expectations are achievable. So we have something we've developed called Plan for Life. And we have, it's working kind of in raw form right now, and it has 10 aspects to it. And they include things like education, psychology, financial skills, spiritual training, dental, executive skills, those type of things, managing money, because like we have a girl on our property right now going to nursing school, and it does her no good to become a nurse if she cannot manage the money when she graduates, or if she doesn't know to executive skills being as simple as brush your teeth, comb your hair, and tuck in your shirt when you come to class. Mm. So if you can't do those things, then maybe you wouldn't get a job when you've completed nursing school.
Right.
So there's such a broad aspect to that. And so for us, what we do is we look and we assess someone when we bring them into the program. We have 11 in the program right now, and we assess where they're at. So like Mary, she had achieved all the grades, which was very unusual, so she could go on to nursing school. So check the box on that. We don't need to spend any more time with that. But now we need to look at some of the executive skills and expectations. But to your question on blocks, it's really almost all mental with what they feel that they can achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So as you're talking, it reminds me, it gets me thinking about how we create a sense of engagement, mm-hmm. How we move out of a position where people have no real taking ownership. And a lot of what you're talking about is education. And as we both have discussed, I'm huge on education. And I believe that poverty is bondage. And I believe that we can be liberated from that. And it's been said that it's almost like slavery. You're enslaved to this track that you're in, right? And it's been said that the educated mind cannot be enslaved. It's a huge statement, really, to unravel, right? So what does that mean? It means that the more education I have, the more I have internal and external resources to help me to navigate to a better future state. Because that's really what leadership is. And we're talking about leading, we're talking about being led, and then we're talking about leading. And so when we have the educational components that are tied to not just a reward, but satisfaction, perceived satisfaction. We look at rewards as the answer, but it's not really necessarily the reward that's the answer. It's our perception of future satisfaction that motivates and guides us. So, the nursing, the degree, the certification is a reward. But what satisfies me in that, right? What satisfies me is knowing that some of my needs will be met. Satisfies me to know that I'll be able to have comfort. It satisfies me to know that I can eliminate some of my self-limiting beliefs, and maybe I can help others along the journey. All these and many, many other components to it, right? Do you tie your educational journey to a sense of perceived satisfaction?
Absolutely. One of the things that we work with, and I actually started this with my son years ago, was I did a chart on the wall, and on the left-hand side, like a little Excel spreadsheet, I'd put a quarter hour of homework, a half an hour homework, and then all the way up to say 3 or 4 hours a day in homework. And then in the middle, I would tie that to a possible job. Like the bottom one would be like, McDonald's, and then it'd be trash collector, and then, assistant office manager, and then all the way up to a doctor or engineer. And then I put a dollar figure on it, which was wrong because, an eighth grader doesn't know what 50,000 is versus 70,000. So I erased the dollar figure, and then I started putting lifestyle things. So like I said, okay, if you study for a half an hour, you can be an office manager and you can ride a bike to work. And if you go up one level and you go 15 more minutes a day, you can have a car. And then if you go up 2 more things and you study and you become something else, then you can have a house and a car. And then if you want to be an engineer or a doctor or a CPA, then you can have a car, a house, and a vacation home. Mm. And so I do the same thing in Guatemala. I use different things to run the lifestyle, but it's not from a greed-based thing like, I got so much money in the bank, or it's literally like for them, like, hey, I can have a motorcycle. I don't have to take the bus system anymore. Mm-hmm. Or I could have my own house, or I could actually take vacations or dress nice. I don't have to get my clothes from the hand-me-down store. So absolutely you tie that, and then, you can tie it to other things like helping other people, like helping your mother or helping your brother. There's a lot of the people that are stepping out of poverty that we are around. A lot of their resources they want to go to help their siblings step out step out as well, or their parents, or make their parents' life easier, or help their parents have a surgery that they've needed for 5 or 10 years. So absolutely. And I think if you present that correctly, it doesn't come from the greed angle. It comes from like an expectation or a goal that you can achieve. Yeah. So it literally kind of paints a video picture of like what that would look like. Why would I want to do that? I sit down with my guys often and I say, well, if you continue this way, then you're going to just go to the United States through a coyote and you're going to sneak through that Mexico border, and this is what your life's going to look like. Or you can educate yourself and do this, and this is what your life looks like. You're here with your wife, your kids, you see your kids grow up, you have a car, you do. And so the visualization does help very much.
And that's a real thing. I mean, that's a real sort of competition to creating an environment to where you will be educated and learn to thrive in your community versus, like you said, I mean, and what's a coyote? So it's not actually a real coyote.
Sorry, using phrase. So a coyote is someone that takes the people from Central America and actually takes them across the river and brings them in the United States illegally.
And what would you estimate the percentage of people who actually take the coyote route versus the education route currently?
Right now, probably 90%, maybe 95% in the area I'm at. Yeah. We have in our area, Nate, we have lost 60 to 65% of all the men, like literally all the men. And when I say men, that's loose. That's like from down to 10 years old. So like a 32-year-old father and his 12-year-old son will come. And so when we go out to the countryside to help, we're running into these abandoned women. And of course that leads to abuse with their daughters, and because there's nobody there to protect the family home. And then you go to the next family home, and that's a lady and her daughters. And you go to the next family home, and that's a lady and her daughters, or a grandpa.
Wow.
So, and right now, that's the only thing that they look at is their way out. They don't look at school unless they're talking to someone like myself, because nobody is pushing the school.
Right. They don't even know that's a resource and a viable resource.
What the outcome could be.
Yeah.
They're just saying like, I take this coyote, I sell my motorcycle, and I travel the U.S. just like all my buddies did. And then I have this money and this great life in the United States. They don't understand the cost of living here. And then they send their money back home. And then there's just all kinds of breakdown. Besides the actual neglect of breaking the law and entering the United States, there's all kinds of other emotional things. They leave one family and sometimes they come back to the U.S. and create another family, and then they get deported and they go back to Guatemala and create a third family. And in their wake, they've got 3 families that are totally dysfunctional.
Are there cases where you've been able to help someone from making a decision and not go the coyote route?
I like to think there could be a couple, but I know one for sure that was one of the sharpest guys I've been around, and well educated. He was actually college educated, but he had just not been able to find a job. And he had in his mind the only way to make it was do what all his friends were doing, was to hire the coyote and come to the United States. And I got wind of it. And I brought him into our house with his wife, and we went through it. I went through exactly what would happen. Look at your kids right now. What are you doing? And it worked. And so I think it put him on a different trajectory, with his education and with what he was able to do. But I think I got a reputation by doing that. Now 3 or 4 people have left, and they all have left family members saying, I knew George would talk me out of it, so I just left before I told him.
Oh. Wow. And so this is what you're facing.
Yes.
I mean, it's jaw dropping. I mean, if you think about it, in any community here in the United States, and name any city, right, or any municipality where 90% of the males are gone. It's almost like post-apocalyptic, sounding, but yet that's what you're experiencing in your communities there.
Yeah. The area we're in is a very small town, and we've been told they can't tell us the exact number of people that leave, but they can tell us the exact number of people that return. And so when they're deported off the plane, they have to put down the town they go to. Hoyova, being a very, very small town, is number 2 to Guatemala City, which has 8.5 million people in it, same size as Chicago. That's how bad it is in the area we're at because of the poverty and because of that. So we know that the people that are being deported, it's a higher percentage, which would make sense that the people leaving is a greater percentage.
So then it's mostly women in your program.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're training them.
Yeah. And a few young men, but very few.
Yeah. And so what are you seeing? Is it working?
It is, but one of the things that has just caused me to be rewired as a missionary, as a businessman, as someone helping in humanitarian efforts is the time. I've always, I don't know whether it's our American standard, add water and stir, 3 months, 6 months, save them, evangelize them, next. But now I have came to the mental, I don't know what you call epiphany, that when I take a project, someone on, it's minimum 3 years. Most likely it's going to be 5 years. So it's a huge investment, to think, okay, I'm taking Josue, I'm taking, Sophia, I'm taking this person on, and it's going to be 3 to 5 years, 3 years, like if everything was perfect.
Half a decade.
Yeah. Because there's so many things to unwind, because I look at it like they're deeper in that groove of poverty. I don't know if that's a good word picture, but, a lot of times, like we talked at the beginning of the podcast, sometimes people just need a job or a vocation or some little thing or a hope or a hamburger. And man, they gave them the hope and they went down and got a job and they turned it around. I just think of those people not being deeply integrated into poverty.
Right.
They're able to step out.
Right.
The people that I seem to be working with right now are in what I call generational, multi-generational poverty or cyclical poverty.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard it said that poor people teach their kids to be poor people. And it's such a statement. And I try to grapple with that. Is this true? And in some cases, it's absolutely
it's always true.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, you were raised by what it sounds like to be a powerfully optimistic mom, someone that was sort of, if we're being honest, kind of outside her pay grade.
Yeah.
She was in a certain situation, motivated, a broken home, and she was pushing you. That is highly unusual. And I was raised by a similar situation, almost identical, actually, as far as checking the box. And my mom was the same way. She was very optimistic. She wasn't as driven, but she was very optimistic and expectations and supportive of all that. But when you have someone that is dealing in multi-generational poverty, the baggage, if you just think of the word picture and you think of someone carrying like 5 international pieces of baggage, from abuse and emotional abuse and everything. And now they got kids in tow. They can't even begin to think about how to help their 5 kids. And if the 5 kids aren't helping them, then they almost disown them. The one of our number 2 in the ministry is a young lady that has stepped out of poverty on her own before I got there, through education and through work. And she has constantly been heckled by her mother through the process, even though she was earning almost 5 times of what girls in her position would have without the education and without the drive. Still, at 30 years old, everything's successful, earning the money, having the lifestyle, having a motorcycle, having everything that a lot of people wouldn't have in that culture. And she's still heckled by her mother because she's not helping the mother.
Right.
And that's, to me, that is some of the, diagnostic of a poverty situation, that someone can step out. Yeah. That's why I use that phrase, which is kind of uncanny, but crabs in a bucket. Someone tries to get out, everybody wants to eat the person's climbing.
Wow. And in committing to 3 to 5 years of staying in the trenches with someone, I mean, not only is it a commitment based on, your logic and reason and rationale of how you can help someone, but I know you've got to have just a myriad of emotions that play into and are a part of this experience. How do you feel when you're in the trenches at ground zero? Help our audience to understand what that feels like.
Well, there's a lot of frustrating days. One instance is we let a young man into our house, and he was one of the few that didn't take the trip over to the United States, and I was trained him to be an accountant. And so I decided to pay to put him in school, and we had this agreement. We talked about it every night, and literally I'd say, how's homework going? Well, because of his low expectations, because of his low, moral self-standing, if you would be, he couldn't even negotiate school. He was too embarrassed to ask for help. So he stopped going to school. So I'm paying for school. I'm paying for him in my house. I'm feeding him like a horse. And then he didn't even go to school for the last 45 days. Sat and looked me eye to eye. School's going great. And he really wasn't a deceptive type person, but he was just caught and didn't know what to do. And he didn't know or have the confidence to talk to his teacher and work things out. I always think about it. There was a point in time when I went back late in life and got my MBA. And there was that last semester when we were doing econ and, international finance and international marketing. I just kind of got in trouble, and I went to the teacher 3 times a week during finals. And I said, help me. And they'd work through the programs. And I know that a little bit of that helped a lot. And then I graduated with a strong grade, but I had the wherewithal to ask for help. Yeah. And that takes a lot of confidence to walk in someone's office and say, I do not get this.
Right.
And so we ended up getting the bad news at the end of the year that he didn't go to school, and all our money was wasted. And everybody in our ministry said, toss him to the wind, no accountability, the American mantra, no accountability. We caught you, And as I prayed about it, God just gave me mercy. And so we sit down and we talked to him, and we said, we need some more parental guidance in your life. Yeah. Your mother needs to move out of the community and move into town so she can watch over you. If she does, I'll put you and your sister back in school. Mm. And now we have actually hired them a year later. Now this is the second year. He actually attended classes this year. Wow. He got through it. He had the confidence to ask the questions. We had better dialogue with the teachers. And now we've hired him at the ministry, and we're actually working with him and his sister to be the accountants for a hospital that we're going to build in 3 years. So we're working on the staff almost 5 years before we actually need them.
Man, and I want to talk about the hospital here in a little bit. That story is so touching to me because it identifies a quintessential issue we have in leadership. Is we tend to misdiagnose the real issue. The real issue with someone not completing isn't that they're a waste or that they're useless. It's that we've set unrealistic expectations based on their very unique circumstances and their own drives, i.e. if someone has very low self-confidence, low self-esteem, low self-efficacy, low locus of control, however you want to describe it, and we put them in an environment that has high challenge situations. As leaders, we should expect them to face misery and burnout rather than mastery and engagement based on the resources and the parameters that we've set them in. We've essentially set them up to fail.
Absolutely.
And so in a situation, now, granted, we can't identify all those components up front. Sometimes things are lingering. Sometimes we just don't have all the tools and resources. But when you're able to identify that after the fact, rather than just throw them out and say you're useless, you say, okay, here's where we missed it. We're going to add these pieces because we now know what parameters we're faced with, what type of resources we have, so that we can then re-aim for success. It's a much different mindset because we're not focused on punishing the individual. We're focused on what resources are missing in helping this individual to achieve our outcomes that we desire.
Really well said, Nate. One of the things that was been introduced to me by my number 2 down there in Guatemala was we were having this very talk about one of our individuals, and we're trying to put him into nursing school as well to run some of the diagnostic equipment at the hospital. And I've been picking up that he feels like he's pushed a little bit. Like I had to go to school and I had to work and I take care of my dad. And I had this track, I was tracking him. Okay, you take this class, this class, this class. And so when the hospital's complete, you'll be able to run the ultrasound, you'll be able to take x-rays, And my number 2 and said, maybe we need to give him a year off. Mm. And, that concept in the United States, I've never heard that. You're going to get your doctorate. Maybe you need to take a year. You're going to take your MBA. Oh, no, you're finishing your residency. Won't you take a year? I really had to put a bridle in my mouth and sit down and think about that. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be horrible if George just ran this guy over? Took someone that's one of the best, and I wasn't patient. And so I decided that I would give him a year off. And so I sat back and I disengaged the George, and I said, okay, let him to come and tell me he's going to take a year off. And so when we had our annual meeting to talk to him about the plans for next year, and he's an employee of the organization. And I said, okay, well, what's your plans? And I was fully expecting him to tell me that. And he says, well, I'm going to go ahead and start nursing school next year.
Really?
I'm like, okay, well, giddy up, let's go. But it had to come from within.
That's right.
An external pressure would have been a crash and burn
in this particular situation. That's why we have to know our people, right? Individually.
Yeah.
What they're going through, what they're struggling with, and how. And it's not easy.
No.
If somebody listening who's in a leadership, like, wow, that's a lot of work. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
But it's extremely satisfying when we reach our outcomes and we have those rewards that help us to create an environment where people can thrive. And so someone listening is like, okay, I get it now. And it's starting to make sense, because this translates not just to, if you're in missions, it translates to the work environment, translates to the home with your children, translates to your peers. This is a universal, if you will, application of how we do influence and leadership. And to put it this way, and of course it applies in a poverty situation, but there's no quick fix. There's no easy, just throw some more money at it, right? This is doing life, and it takes years to create habits and behaviors, and it also takes years to unwind and change those habits and behaviors.
Well said, because you can't take 500 years of cyclical poverty and change it in 3 months or one college class. They're going to get feedback from their grandparents. Why don't you just stay home and have babies? Why don't you it's raining today. Don't eat. That's my favorite, is it's raining. Don't even go to class, in an area where it rains 100 days a year. So you have to unwind that, and you have to be patient.
Yeah.
And I'm only preaching to myself,
right?
As you're starting to understand the process and stepping out, and just if this one individual needed a year off, I don't think it would have been an indictment against his drive. I think it would have just been where he was at, and then he would have been able to come back strong.
Yeah.
And go forward. And he might go 1 or 2 more years, and then still need that 1 year to kind of digest, because they just are not built to do what we do here. Culturally, they're not.
Yeah. And that's okay, because we can put the great thing about setting realistic timelines is that we can make adjustments based on new information, right? Because we can only make decisions based on the information we have at the time. And there's two points I want to make. That's one, I want to dive into that. And another point I want to talk about is that how change happens gradually when there are just ingrained behaviors. And this is anecdotal, but when I was young, I did a lot of creative writing, a lot of poetry, very wordy prose. But when I got to college, as you know, and going to business school, I had a professor who said, Nate, I love that you're doing all of this wordy writing, but it doesn't belong in a business paper. Concise and precise. He gave me those 2 words. And so I got to my undergrad and I started working on that. Well, 4 years of undergrad, still trying to flesh that out. 3 years of MBA, right? Still trying to flesh that out. 5 to 6 years of PhD work. By the end of my dissertation, I finally put to death that last bit of wordiness in my writing. How many years did that take, right? And so, and again, it's anecdotal, but the point is that be patient with yourself, and set real deadlines, set real goals, but know that it's a process, and you can change if you simply know. I love what Paul talked about, the pillars of love, right? Patience and kindness. Wow. If we can just exhibit patience and kindness in how we exhibit leadership, because we're oftentimes we don't want to happen. I think one of the fears is we're afraid that if we take our foot off the gas, that nothing will happen. We're afraid that we won't be good stewards of the time that we're entrusted with. But we have to be discerning in that, right? It's not always about, as fast as you can go, drive. I've been there. I used to do triathlon and marathon, and I was always like, they call it PR, personal record. And actually, it wasn't until I hurt my back that I started jogging slower. I was like, it's kind of nice jogging slower and not always racing to get to the finish line.
Right.
And I think that's okay for people who are driven like you and myself to take a step back and say, you know what, maybe it's not on our timeline. Maybe sometimes our timeline isn't the best timeline for this experience we call life in every season of it.
Well, I think there is, you opened up a huge door there, because I think of several things in my own life when I have outran a door, or the environment wasn't ready, or you're in front of the market. We all know businesses that have failed because they were in front of the market, and I know, we've done a lot of talk about business, you and I, but one of the things is, sometimes it's better to be the second business in a market, because the first one, has all the R&D and they try to convince all the customers this new product or service is needed. And then by the time everybody figures out that, I do need that new widget or that new service, you're out of money. And then the second company moves in without the R&D and without the changing the market. And I think that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm around right now a lot of pastors. And one of the things that I'm hearing for the first time in a long time, I'm hearing a lot of conversation about sabbaticals. And almost every pastor literally I talk to now is talking, hey, my sabbatical's next year. And so, when I first was introduced to that idea, I was like, what is that? Well, I take 6 weeks with our denomination or with our beliefs or whatever we believe that, we need to take some time to just spend time with God and our family and just kind of rest. And at first I was like, what? You're going to slow down? You're going to get lapped, and the more I understood and started looking at just God's natural creation about, fields being left vacant 1 out of 7 years when you're doing agriculture, a lot of the processes, because we're humans, we're not machines, we're not made of metal, and I'm seeing so much energy and creativity and longevity come out of the idea of a sabbatical for, let's say, a pastor, someone in ministry. I don't know if that idea has ever been introduced to the business world.
It's interesting because it's there in pastoral work. It's there in academia. Many professors take sabbaticals, but in business, nope. A month to not do any work. It's unheard of.
Yeah.
Yet I wonder what possibilities will open up, because as well as I do, when we've taken time to decompress, to reflect, sometimes our best ideas are born out of this time to take a step back, get on the balcony, whatever you want to call it. And also we need time to replenish. we don't get it. But look at, we're talking about God, ministry. Jesus, he retreated to the other side of the lake, and he needed some time
with the Heavenly Father to pray. And
yeah, it's a good thing. By the way, it's interestingly, Jesus was never late to an appointment, right? and he was always on time because he understood the relationship with setting realistic expectations. He probably could have, gotten more people on that quota for the day for healings, right? But he knew that there was time that was needed to rest. The other piece of that point I wanted to make is that sometimes life does happen and things don't always go the way we thought they would. I've got a colleague who was in my program with me who had physical ailments and all kinds of challenges and was about to drop out of the program. And through conversations and encouragement, don't drop out, get well, and then continue where you left off.
Right.
And I'm happy to say that he completed his exams and passed them, and now he's working on his dissertation, right? So that's that hope piece.
Right.
But it's also expectations, because the expectation is you will overcome these obstacles.
Right.
With the company of hosts who are bind around you to help you to overcome them so that you can then take the next step of the journey which you've committed to. And in leadership, it's been said that the two most resonant and recurring themes in leadership are vision and focus, and in all the leadership approaches. And in a way, hope and expectations mirror vision and focus, right? Because vision is naturally optimistic. It's naturally hopeful, right? No one wants to go to a worse future state, right? You want better. That's what our vision of the future should be. And focus is really focusing on what are the expectations day to day that are needed to be met so that the outcome expectation is realized.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the interesting things. We were talking just earlier about the kids and about this passport situation. And a lot of the people that were praying for us thought that we were going to be able to bring them with us because we would already got a visa. They didn't understand you need a visa to travel from Guatemala to the United States in addition to the passport. And we did not achieve that. It's a corruption thing, and we got to pay more money and wait in line and all that stuff. But after spending 10 appointments at the passport office to get the kids these passport, and it was right the week before we came and left them for 6 weeks to come back to the United States to spend time with our family, to have my sabbatical, so to speak, even though I haven't rested much, is my wife and I were talking, and we were saying, like, the kids seem at such peace this year.
Yeah.
There was no anxiety about us leaving. There was no, like, when are you coming back? There's like, what are we going to do? We're going to talk every night, all this. And we came to the decision, or we came to the understanding that the kids had watched us fight for their passport. Mm. And they didn't understand the amount of money we spent, but they knew there was money involved. And they knew that we'd spend a lot of time. And we made several trips down. Including one day we went to the passport office 3 times in one day. There's 500 people in line. So literally, you're just really just leaning into this thing. And when they finally got their passport and we came back and we kind of had, I call a small victory a victory, but a small victory. Now we got to move on to the visa. I think the kids realized how much we loved them and how much we were taking care of them. And so their original concerns about being left or when is George and Tammy coming back were all dismissed because their cup was full. They realized that we had fought for them.
Yeah.
And that they were loved and that now things were going to be okay. And I'm wondering if that's where someone has to move from, or that's their grounding, if you would, be their roots before they move on, is they have to understand that they're going to be okay.
I've talked about this. In fact, I was on one of our solo episodes and some others. I talked about the scarcity mindset and the need for safety. And so when we're struggling to feel safe, we expend tremendous amounts of energy to protect the very little that we have to be safe. And this concept is involved in a business environment. People don't feel safe at work. They're going to refocus energy that's usually meant for performance in an organizational environment into feeling safe in an environment. Same thing in a home. Not only that, I mean, you can say it in a community, in a nation. And so once people feel safe, then that energy expenditure can go to more productive activities. And I think in a way, that's what you're talking about. Once people feel loved, because love is not just an emotion, it's an action. And once people know that you care about them and that you have empathy and that you will fight for them, because that's what leadership is. In some ways, we're freedom fighters, we're liberators. And so people want to know that you'll fight for them, because if they know you'll fight for them, they will then in turn connect with you in that shared struggle. And which is a perfect transition as we talk about the hospital, because vision and focus, right? Hope and expectations. This is becoming a reality. This was a vision in Guatemala for you to provide medical care, and you'll share more about it, to those who need safety, who need you to share in their struggle, who need liberation, who need freedom fighters. And I'm holding a brochure now. Tell us more about it.
Well, Nate, I don't think we got 3 hours, but I'll do my best to be concise. So in Guatemala, you first have to ask yourself the question, why a hospital? Why here? Why now? We have a hospital in town, okay? It's a regional hospital. But Guatemala is, out of 195 countries, is the fourth worst for nutrition. National stats would have that 70% of the kids, and I would say in our area probably 90% of the kids are lost the word there, but they cannot grow because they're actually undernutrition. They actually end up being smaller. Kids have babies between 12 and 14. So medically speaking, if a 12-year-old is pregnant and the birth canal is 7 centimeters and the baby's head is 9 centimeters, one of them dies. And we lose over 200 kids in our little area a year in that fashion. And many times by multiple babies by the same mother, again at 14 or something. There is organ harvesting going on in the next hospital over. A mother will go in to have a baby and come out with one less kidney. There is doctors will tie the tubes of the women without even telling them a 14-year-old can't have a baby anymore. And over there, having babies is really the gift to the husband. So if you can't have any more babies, you're a lot of times, proposition. Yeah, a lot of times you're divorced at that point. And our area is made up of indigenous. By that I mean the Quiche Indians, which are about 85% of the people we minister to in our area of Huelva, if you would be our county of Huelva. And there's about 160,000 of them, and most of them will not come to the hospital because of all the things that I've mentioned, along with more. And in this brochure, we've done several case studies because we have a ministry called Ray of Hope, where we minister to 72 special needs kids. And the kids are just left, literally some of them are put in chicken cages. It's just unhuman what they do to the special needs kids. The parents do to the special needs kids. And this whole thing just screams that there needs to be better healthcare. But like I tell our donors and I tell the people involved in this project is it's not the building. The building will be nice. The building will be state of the art, Lord willing. But it's about the approach to the indigenous. It's about the love. As an example, if someone needs to have their appendix taken out, you need to sit down with 20 people in a room and tell the whole family of why this person has to go under the knife and why they have to go to sleep and why they are going to have to act a certain way when they come out to repair their bodies and not work for couple weeks or whatever. And so there's a lot of communication. So there's going to be three unique, if you would be, value propositions for the hospital. One is going to be, it's going to be a mission-based hospital. And what we mean by that, to keep operating costs down, we're going to be inviting in medical doctors from all around the world, including the United States, Canada, Europe, and even Central America, maybe even within Guatemala, to come and serve maybe for a week, 10-day stints to do operations, to do dental, to do psychiatric care. That's going to offset our operating costs. So we may not have surgeons on site, 100% of the time, but we may do 60 surgeries, every 5 weeks when a team arrives. The second thing is it's going to be an outpatient because of the expertise with surgery, and because we don't want to have 24-hour staff and stuff like that. We're going to run an outpatient surgery center so that people would have their surgery and then leave and then go home. And then the third aspect, and it's the reason why we've really gotten enough inertia here with the project, is it's going to be a training hospital. So as an example, there are what we call in the United States, it translates midwives, and sometimes it's midwives / witch doctors over there that are in these communities, and they are the doctor. That's the outpatient place that you go to. And as this lady shows up with the roots that she boils in hot waters and sip this and does this, and that's all the medical care. That's 500 years of what they've been used to. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing is, as a ministry, but also as health and wellness, we're going to be inviting them in and training the midwives to be even have a higher level of expertise. We're not going to come in and say, oh, you're a midwife, you've never been to medical school, you don't know what you're doing, get out of my way. Like some ministries do. We're going to come in and we're going to embrace them. And we're going to just give them some common sense things. If you have a young girl that's having a baby, and then we'll have a model of the birth canal, and we'll say, so it could happen that you would need to measure this, and then you would need to, if you suspect there's a problem, you need to prepare the family to come in, for a C-section, to save the baby. And then you get the reputation, the midwife of doing that. So the needs, Nate, is just so overwhelming. It's hard to, it's easy to just get overwhelmed with them. But we're going to start off with maybe servicing about 900 people the first year, 2,500 the second year, and we're going to work our ways up to about 5,000 a year that we'll be ministering to in the way of surgeries. The 2 years that I've been working on this project, we've been doing case studies, we've talked to judges, lawyers, social workers, other doctors, other hospitals, and we've come up with 8 specialties that we're going to be working on, very practical things like dental, psychiatric, nutrition, obviously a stomach doctor, a surgeon, an internist. Those are the type of things that we're doing. And we believe that the ministry, our ministry of Send Me, will ultimately come like a tree, which is our new logo, by the way, Spreading Hope, is going to be like a tree. It's going to be like in all areas. So if someone comes into the hospital, maybe they need a home built, or maybe they need a mission trip to come to their church and help them out, or maybe they have a special needs kid that we can help out. So it's going to be kind of the sharp end of the stick, if you would be, for ministry. And so we've just completed the design. It's a really small lot. We were given the land free by the municipality of Hoyova because they loved our vision. And so we have the land free and clear. We just completed the brochure about 3 weeks ago. So it's just now going out to a lot of donors that have expressed some interest in it. Project's going to be about $1.8 million to build the hospital, about $1 million to put the diagnostic equipment in it, and staffing, furniture, and those type of things. And then we'll keep the operating cost at a bare minimum the first couple of years. And then we're going to build a ministry endowment so that we become self-sufficient in the way of the interest paying for the doctors. So that's the Cliff Notes version of the hospital in Hoyova.
Well, I mean, it's so important, so needed, and the way you describe this epidemic right now of the organ harvesting and all the different issues, and I think it's important how you've brought in the possibility for the rotation of the teams and from outside of the community, because if the issue is within the community, you're facing an uphill battle by having the physicians all sourced from the local region.
Right.
So that's important too. How can people partner with you?
Well, they can reach out to us. Of course, our website is sendme.org, and you can send us a note. My phone, 636-751-8899, which is, I can answer it in Guatemala, or you get a message and then I can call back. Certainly, if somebody has an interest maybe in being on a mission trip or being a donor, I'd love to talk to them more about this process. Right now, the next step for us is more corporate and licensing issues as we get soil samples together, because it's an earthquake region, and we're making sure that we're built a properly structured and hospital. And so we're going down that process as well. So Lord willing, we'll be able to raise those funds and actually start pouring some cement in about a year. So
I can't wait to be there. The $1 million question is, as we talk about hope and expectations, vision and focus, 10 years ago, did you see yourself building a hospital in Guatemala?
No, I did not. 10 years ago, we were doing small mission trips, maybe twice a year, doing some work over there and just seeing what God would do on a really short-term basis. And I think as we moved there, just now, it's been 5 years, Nate, since I sat in your office and mentioned that to you, that God has really opened up our, capacity to do something like this. And then the more we talk and the more we network and the more we express and communicate our faith, God just is moving heaven and earth. I mean, I just got off the phone with a doctor last week that's bringing an ultrasound down with him on a mission trip and giving it to the ministry. Yeah. The newest technology that can do heart, liver, stomach, OBGYN, knees. And so it's interesting, as you express faith, and my journey with having faith in God and what he wants us to do. I think two things I would just throw out there for someone that might be in a situation where God's calling them to walk by faith is hear from God, and no matter how big or small it is, proclaim it. I think that's one of the first things you have to do. You have to buy in and you say, God, the hospital was not my idea. God gave me that. And one of the things, Nate, I'm doing, you probably would say maybe, I don't know, I'm arrogant or whatever, but I took this idea and I'm telling everybody my work is done. Mm. God called me to build the hospital. I did my business thing. I did case studies. I looked at other hospitals. I built a plan. I designed it. We were gifted the land. And I'm like, okay, God, now the printing is done. I've communicated all those ideas. I lay it down at people's offices and I say, I'm done, God. Now it's time for you to show up.
No, I don't think that's arrogant at all. I think that's walking in faith. And also taking the steps that are ordained before you. And I think it creates hope in others, because sometimes we don't know what the future holds, but if we simply just plant the seeds and take the steps forward, right? That's all we need to do. And the path will be revealed to us. It's interesting. We talk about, the old scripture that says, it's a lamp unto your feet, not a spotlight, right? Out into 10 years from now. Yeah, that's beautiful, and we're so glad to be partnered with you, and so glad to share these snippets, if you will, in this journey and be a part of it. We'll make sure to put how people can find you in the show notes.
Thank you.
As you continue to do a good work in these communities and help inspire and develop and really exhibit leadership. And so, I've defined leadership as discovery, influence, and achievement of shared purpose. And, you start with discovery with your mission trips and exploration, and then your influence to take a deeper step and actually stop doing what you were doing in the U.S., a successful career and full-time ministry in a third world country in a small poverty-stricken town, and then begin to influence the community to share in achieving a better future state for them step by step by step in a new way. And so I just want to commend you and affirm you in that. You're doing it.
Thank you. Well, it's a part, and you've been a big part of this as well, Nate, the journey even before 5 years ago. Yeah. And your support and your prayers and your thoughts and your exhorting, and you're always there, and we talk and email a couple times every trip I go back. And so for me, that's a big part of feeling like, when we have people step up with us, for Tammy and I, it's very, I can't think of the right wording. Encouragement's more than that. It's affirming the people, like, okay, they believe in this vision too.
Yeah.
And now we can walk together.
That's right.
That's right. So I appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. So the next time we see you, we have to bring Tammy.
Yes.
And visit with us. And we can't wait to partner with you, join you along this journey. We plan on taking a trip and visiting with you and bringing my son down to Guatemala this year.
I think that's an excellent time for a podcast.
Okay.
On location.
I love it.
On location.
Let's do it. All right, my friend. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
God bless you, brother.
Nate. Appreciate it.
Well, my friend, I am so thrilled that you joined me on this episode of A Call to Leadership. And before you go to the next episode, especially if you're binge listening, take a moment. I would love to get your honest review right here on your screen. Your feedback is so important. It helps the podcast. It encourages me, and it helps me. It helps me to give you more and more and more value. So I can't wait to read your review. I can't wait to be with you on the next episode. I'm Dr. Nate Sala. This is A Call to Leadership.